California's High-Speed Rail Authority hopes to begin construction on the initial 29-mile segment from Madera to Fresno this summer. But with legal challenges, funding questions, and diminishing popular support, some are questioning whether California can or should take on a major infrastructure project. Supporters, such as Governor Brown, say it is a critical piece to California's future infrastructure needs. Others, like Assembly Minority Leader Connie Conway and many Republican politicians, say that the money could be better spent on other infrastructure projects, like fixing our highways. We'll examine what is happening to begin the first segment and whether, in light of a mountain of obstacles, high-speed rail will ever become a reality, with California Transportation Secretary Brian Kelly and Lou Thompson, chairman of the High-Speed Rail Peer Review Group. High-speed rail, the little engine that could or couldn't.
Additional funding for the Maddy Report made possible by a grant from Paramount Agricultural Companies, growing healthy food for you and your family.
From Fresno, the Maddy Report, with Executive Director of the Maddy Institute, Mark Kepler.
Last year, Governor Brown referred to high-speed rail as a little engine that could. Well, can it or will it? We're fortunate to be joined by Brian Kelly, the Secretary of the State Transportation Agency, the agency that addresses a myriad of state transportation issues, including high-speed rail. Welcome to the Maddy Report, Secretary Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Pleased to be here.
Well, recently you and Mary Nichols, who's the chair of the California Air Resources Board, wrote an op-ed piece in the LA Times extolling the virtues of high-speed rail. So for those who didn't read it, what were your main points?
Well, the main point of the op-ed piece in the LA Times was to illustrate the environmental benefits of the high-speed rail project, particularly in a year where the governor is proposing to use what's referred to as cap-and-trade funds for this project. It was very important to lay out why this is an important project so that our transportation system in California is not just meeting mobility and safety objectives, but also meeting our sustainability and air quality objectives. And so we wanted to make sure that we were had the opportunity to share with folks the myriad of environmental benefits associated with the project.
You know, one of the things I remember reading in that article was you were talking about if you don't build high-speed rail, what you're going to have to do in terms of costs for increased roads and airports and that kind of thing. Can you explain a little bit about what the choice is as we're growing as a state?
Sure. Well, you know, in California, we add about 5 million people every decade. And the increasing demand with our demographic shift toward an older population is for more mobility choices. There's a demand for how people get around that says we ought to move off of the vehicle solely and onto other convenient, fast, clean options. And so the project's vitally important to help us move in that direction. And you know, that was a key part of what we wanted to portray in that piece.
Yeah, my recollection was they were talking about something in the range of $200 billion for more roads and airport gates.
That's right. I think the estimate was about $158 billion. And the issue, thank you, the issue was, you know, we're at capacity in a lot of instances. Our urban areas around California make up the most congested urban area, freeway areas in the country. And that's true across the board: Los Angeles, San Diego, San Francisco. You know,
even in the Central Valley. I mean,
even in the Central Valley, and even in, our airports are the other way we travel. The route between San Francisco and Los Angeles is the busiest short haul route in the country, and about 1 in 4 flights are delayed now. Due to capacity constraints, and it's very difficult to expand those airports.
Well,
they're very expensive.
I want to ask you about that $250 million of cap-and-trade money in the governor's budget for high-speed rail. Well, the LAO recently, not so recently, a little while ago, said that may be in violation of the law. What's your response to that?
Well, I think the LAO's view of that is a little bit too narrow in terms of its interpretation of AB 32. AB 32 is what set out California's greenhouse gas emission reduction policy. It included the ability to create a cap-and-trade program and said that program ought to be about reducing greenhouse gas emissions. One of the questions is, are you reducing greenhouse gas emissions limited to 2020, or is the program to go beyond that? And I would encourage anybody to look at AB 32 because in the very language of that bill, it states that this is not about just doing that, reducing those emissions until 2020, but to do it beyond, and that it's very clear in the bill itself that you have to include strategies in our growth that address that issue well beyond 2020, and clearly high-speed rail would go beyond that.
Well, you know, $250 million is nothing to sneeze at. It's a lot of money, but it's a small fraction of what it's going to cost to build that first segment, which is about $31 billion. What do you say to those who say this is just a drop in the bucket? It's not going to get you there.
Well, this is the first year that at the state level we are proposing to spend any cap and trade dollars. And so the $250 million is out of an $850 million pot just in this budget year. A fraction of cap and trade dollars going to high-speed rail is proposed ongoing. This is the first year's proposed investment, but the governor is intending, and it'll be certainly clear as we go through the budget process, that the amount going to high-speed rail on an annual basis would be more than that and would be ongoing for as long as we had a cap and trade source.
Okay, so it's $250 million this year, but ongoing.
Ongoing.
All right, let me ask you about this. You know, budgets are about priorities.
Yes.
And so high-speed rail right now is the estimate is $68 billion. Yes. So the question is that where we should be putting $68 billion? Aren't there other higher priority needs like water infrastructure, public employee pensions, retiree health, fixing our roads? How do you respond to that?
Well, the thing about California, and I would say any state, but particularly California, we're a very diverse state. We have a lot of diverse needs. And you have to address more than one thing at one time when you're governing. And in this case, the governor has a very proven track record on being a disciplined, fiscal steward for the state of California. Our budget is now in the best shape it's been in years. And that's in part to very tough decisions that this governor and the legislature has made. But you also have to invest for the future. And really we're at a time, a transformative time in transportation where we're looking at the kinds of investments that we need to make. And I think what I said earlier, and I'd repeat here, is we have to make transportation investments going forward that are not just about moving people, but it's moving people, its safety, and its air quality and environmental stewardship. And the high-speed rail project checks each of those boxes. So we think it's an important investment going forward. I would just add that the revenues we're proposing to use for high-speed rail are coming out of a bond approved by the voters for exactly that purpose, and cap and trade funds, which are for transportation investments that net greenhouse gas emission reductions. And the high-speed rail, again, achieves both of those. The
debate will probably continue, though. Well, up next, we're going to talk about where are we now, an update on the current status of high-speed rail. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Brian Kelly, Secretary of the State Transportation Agency, about California's high-speed rail project. So what's the current status of high-speed rail?
Well, the project's moving forward. It's important to remember that when the bond first passed, we had a $9 billion bond, and that was the only source of investment we had into the project. Since that time, we've secured a $3.3 billion commitment from the federal government. The first phase environmental report is done and certified. We've released the first contract for construction on that segment, and it came in about 20% below the engineer's estimate. And so the project is, there's a lot of positive steps forward on moving the project ahead. We do have some challenges in the litigation area where we have to continue to work through those and comply with court rulings.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about that. I mean, because
Sure.
there have been court rulings. One blocked the sale of $8.6 billion in state bonds. The second revoked the state's funding plan for high-speed rail. Have these decisions effectively hogtied high-speed rail?
Well, the decisions have presented some questions of law that we think need to be clarified, and they're broader than just this project. They have to do with how the state issues bonds for any project, but the process under which we issue what are called general obligation bonds. The project will move forward because the judge's order raised issues again about a process point on issuing bonds. And that's an issue that if we have to go back and retrace our steps and just take another process action, we will. But I don't think the project is necessarily hogtied. It's just we have to be mindful of the process steps we take as we go forward.
The governor recently asked the state Supreme Court to take a look at this issue. The same state Supreme Court basically did a Pontius Pilate, and they kind of washed their hands of it, and they sent it back to the Court of Appeals for expedited consideration.
since the state's obligated to put up money to match that $3 billion that the federal government's already put up, what happens if the state loses at the Court of Appeals level? Is it game, set, match?
No, not at all. As I said, there are larger questions of law that the lower court ruling presented with respect to how the state issues bonds for any project, not just this project. That's why we asked the Supreme Court for a review and some clarity on that point. If the court rules against that writ, we will have to go back and retrace our steps and take some additional actions that the court found that were insufficient the first time. And that involves having our finance committee re-meet and discuss the issuance of bonds and make sure that we have a hearing with evidence presented on the record. There are some challenges with the court's decision that we need to get clarified. Again, broader impacts than just this project.
I want to get to that, but let me ask you one last question on this, and that is, what if you lose? Where would the money come from?
Well, if we lose, I would say two things. One, we still work through the process to ultimately get bond dollars. The judge's order did not take away the legislature's appropriation for the project. So the bond appropriation is done. The issue is, what are the steps you have to follow before you get those bonds issued? So we have to work through that. The second part, though, is, and this is really the importance of the governor's cap and trade proposal. Cap and trade dollars we think are a very good and appropriate use of state funds for a greenhouse gas reducing project. And we will want to use those cap and trade revenues to match federal funds as we go along until we can get the bonds cleared and released. Yeah. So the combination of the two sources of funds are very important to move forward on the project.
And there's obviously going to be probably litigation or something around those cap and trade funds as well if it's approved. Because some people are saying that, yes, maybe high-speed rail is going to impact air quality when it's built, but while it's being built, it's going to actually add to air quality problems, and that's just a debate. I'm going to leave to smarter people than me to discuss.
Yeah, I would just make one comment on that, and that is that the High-Speed Rail Authority has committed to a carbon-neutral construction period using cleaner equipment. They've committed to renewable power to power the train and the system. And they're doing a massive tree planting exercise as well. So carbon neutrality is an objective of the project.
You mentioned also, I want to get back to something you mentioned about the fact that this decision on the bonds for high-speed rail actually cripples the government's ability to sell bonds in all other kinds of public works projects, things like roads and schools. How so?
Well, all general obligation bonds in California establish a finance committee that makes decisions on when you issue bonds. And the finance committee looks at things like what is the market for best rates for bond issuances and things like that. But it is solely tasked with determining the desirability of issuing those bonds. And so that applies to the high-speed rail bond or any other bond. What the judge said is there needs to be more on the record and more evidence before that committee before they make those decisions, but the court didn't set any kind of standard. And so the issue is the law leaves it entirely to that board to make the judgment, says that board can make a judgment based on desirability, which is entirely that board's decision. And so with no standard in place, the question is, are you opening the door to several challenges on any kind of bond, not just high-speed rail, but any bond that the voters have approved to invest in California's infrastructure? And that's a key question that needs to be resolved.
So there's a concern it's potentially a Pandora's box.
That's right.
Okay. Well, I want to thank State Transportation Secretary Brian Kelly for being here. Up next, a conversation with the chair of the High-Speed Rail Peer Review Group, the group established to provide independent judgment regarding the feasibility and reasonableness of the High-Speed Rail Authority's analysis and plans. That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're now joined by Lou Thompson, chair of the High-Speed Rail Peer Review Group. Welcome to the Maddy Report, Lou.
Thanks, Mark. Glad to be here.
So first of all, can you describe a little bit about this High-Speed Rail Peer Review Group and what exactly you guys are doing?
Okay, that's a good question because the Peer Review Group is an unusual group. It was formed by the legislature, appointed by the various cabinet departments. And our job is to look at the issues and then advise the legislature on what the issues are and how to deal with it. There are 8 of us supposed to be right now. There are 4, but there have been 6. experts in a number of different fields, including transportation, rail passenger service, high-speed rail. And we're supposed to review the reports and other things that the High-Speed Rail Authority does and then give the legislature our comments on them. Might be useful if I can summarize what we've done so far as a peer review group. First of all, we generally have said we favor high-speed rail. We think that high-speed rail has got to be a part of the overall picture in California. Most of our transport exports, and we don't think that using more of the past will solve the problems of the future.
But a critic might say that taints your view of the project. You're looking to validate your position on that.
I can't imagine anyone thinking that advocating passenger rail in general taints my view of the project. Okay. I don't believe it does. We think that there are advantages to passenger rail so that it has a role in the transportation system. But I really want to emphasize this. The legislature has to make choices. They can't do everything. Transportation has to compete within the state budget, and high-speed rail has to compete within the transportation area. And so the legislature will not be able to say, well, we'd just like to pay for everything, please. They will have to make hard choices. Our job, as we construe it, is to help them make the right choices and to help them know what they are doing when they make these choices. We are not advocates. There's enough yelling on both sides. The legislature, I think, is not served very well by that, and I think they want someone, at least in between, who can say, these are the issues as we see them, and this is what you should think about them.
Just to give our audience an idea about your background. So why are you on this peer review group?
Well, I have probably the most unusual background for this because I'm the only person in the U.S. who's ever actually built a high-speed rail system in the public sector in the United States, because I ran the Northeast Corridor project at the U.S. Department of Transportation. I worked there for a number of years, and I worked for the World Bank as their railways expert around the world for 17 years. And then I think I visited or traveled on just about every railway and every high-speed railway.
That's a pretty good resume.
So I've been and out. I've seen this, not just from the gee whiz, it looks nice stage, the pictures of Mount Fujiyama in the background, but actually running one of these projects.
Okay. Well, let me ask you about this project specifically. You know, construction was supposed to begin in 2012, end of 2012, then early 2013. Then July, then September. It still hasn't started. So when can the public expect that high-speed rail is actually going to break ground?
Well, I think that you'd have to say that Governor Brown has made this one of his highest priorities. He's put very effective people in charge of it. There's $3 billion in free federal money there. There are $9 billion in California money there. So the pressures to do something are very strong, and I think normally you would think it will get started or it will happen. The challenge is right now the court cases, and if those were to turn out wrong, then it could cause a real problem for the project.
Let's talk about the construction deadline. It's coming up pretty quickly, the first one. The federal stimulus dollars say you've got to get 130 miles done between Madera and Kern County by September 30th of 2017. That's a little more than 3 years away. What do you say to those that are skeptical about the feasibility of meeting that deadline?
Well, let's be exact about that. What the deadline is that the federal money has to be spent, work has to be done, and the federal money has to be spent by September the 30th. It does not say that the entire 130 miles has to be completed. In fact, I'm not sure that there is any specific limit about what has to be done, just that the money has to be spent. It's a challenge. I don't think anyone who's with any experience in this would say otherwise. But there are a number of different ways that this challenge can be dealt with, depending on what they learn as they go along.
What about the segments of, the Central Valley to LA done by 2022 and LA to San Francisco by 2029 as promised in Prop 1A? Are those reasonable expectations?
I think it's going to be hard to meet those, but I looked at the legislation this morning, and the way those are stated is that it is the, quote, intent of the legislature that this should happen. Those are not absolute deadlines after which, the coach turns into a pumpkin. These are intentions of the legislature, and I think they'll do their best to meet that, but it's not something that they can be held to, I don't think, in an enforcement sense.
I guess we'll see maybe another court case on that. Well, when we come back, we're going to talk about the cost of high-speed rail. Does the money exist to pay for it? That conversation in a moment. This is the Maddy Report. Welcome back. We're talking with Lou Thompson, the chair of the High Speed Rail Peer Review Group. One opponent to high-speed rail recently wrote that, quote, "The official price tag of $68 billion is flatly unbelievable." A 2012 study by California Common Sense, a Silicon Valley-based nonprofit, suggested that the final cost would top $203 billion after accounting for inflation, delays, and other financing realities. So what is this project going to cost? Is it going to be $68 billion? Is it going to be $203 billion? Is it going to be something in between?
Well, the real answer to that on all mega projects, of which this is a mega project on steroids, actually, it's one of the largest ones that's ever been done. The real answer to that is we don't know for sure. That the real answer is going to be a distribution of probabilities, and nobody knows what the final number is. Anyone who says now that they know what the exact answer is wrong. They don't have enough information.
Well, let me ask it this way then. Is it going to be closer to $68 billion, or is it going to be closer to $203 billion?
We have no way of knowing at this point. They have yet to do any construction. They have yet to fix the final routes. They have yet to fix much of the technology. The schedule is still in flux. The legal challenges could delay the project or not, who knows. And
so the best you can say is, to the best of our knowledge, we think it's going to be.
The best knowledge, the best forecast that they have made so far was the $64 billion in the 2012 revised business plan, and as far as I know, that was based on all of the techniques that you'd want to use. Now, we have urged them in the 2014 business plan, which is due today, we have urged them to go to a different way of estimating costs, in which they show it as a range of outcomes rather than a single outcome. If they do that, I think we'll have a better handle on it.
Okay.
Call me tomorrow, I'll know the answer.
Okay, I might do that. What about all these delays? Are they going to drive up the costs of high-speed rail?
Delays always drive up the cost, and litigation always is a delay, and that can always drive up the cost. There's no question about that.
So you've got all these federal dollars that you've got to spend, and I read somewhere that if you started construction on January 1st, it would require you to spend $3.75 million a day to spend that money in time under the federal requirements. That would be the fastest use of money in U.S. history. Is that a realistic burn rate?
It could be done. No one can say it can't be done, but what we have said as the peer review group is that that's a massive management challenge, a massive management.
You think they're up to it?
I don't know. We'll have to see. They are confident that they can. The experience of these projects would suggest that confidence is a premium quality here, but it's a challenge.
They've got that $250 million out there that the governor has in the budget using cap and trade money to bolster high-speed rail. Right. Does that sufficiently address the short-term financing issue?
It would be part of the answer, but it's not an entire answer for the short-term answer, and it certainly is not a full answer for the long-term.
So where does the other money come from then? Where's the short answer, the answer for the short-term financing come from?
The answer is that has not been defined. The plan itself called for federal money. Such a program doesn't exist right now, but it could. The 2000 business plan for the high-speed rail suggested a quarter-cent sales tax. I've done a little back-of-the-envelope calculation that said that a 20-cent tax, gallon tax on fuel would pay for the whole program. So there are plenty of ways to pay for it. Question is, which one are we going to implement?
All right, which one would the voters support?
That's right.
What about the long-term financing of high-speed rail? No money is going to be coming out of a Republican-controlled House. And you don't really see any private money on the horizon. So where is the long-term financing for high-speed rail coming from?
As of now, that's not clear. Partly, certainly the state's contribution will have to be raised. That would appear to be clear, but how, I don't know. Future federal programs are certainly up in the air. No one knows whether there will be one, and if so, what it will be. There is a role for the private sector in this, but that role will only emerge from a much clearer business plan, business model for the high-speed rail authority, so they can say, what is the private sector going to do as opposed to what the public sector is going to do. It's a jigsaw puzzle that has to be fit together.
It seems like there's a bit of a pinch here this year, because there's some short-term money that needs to be put up to do the match for the federal government. It's also the long-term of getting this thing built. And the governor is going to be running for election in November. I don't want to get too much into politics on this, but the reality is he probably doesn't want anything on the budget that deviates from his narrative of being a fiscally prudent governor. So then if we're not going to the voters with anything in terms of asking for more support, then what?
My job is to put the issues before the legislature and have them think about it. I'm certainly not advising the governor on
So it's the legislator's responsibility. So bottom line, you're a member of the High-Speed Rail Peer Review Group. In your professional judgment, what do you think? Do you believe that high-speed rail can meet the voter-approved bonds, the restrictions on the voter-approved bonds as it's presently being presented?
That will depend a lot on the interpretation of some of the terms in the law. For example, no operating subsidy. That term is not fully defined, and we've actually asked that it be defined, and it hasn't been. It depends also on what parts of the law you think are hortatory as opposed to mandatory. What I do think is that there is at least one scenario in which California ends up with a very nice high-speed rail service from Los Angeles to San Francisco, and there are other scenarios in which we end up with less. And what we're trying to do is make sure people understand that none of these are certain, and that there are ways in which it could turn out in different results. Okay,
lots of questions. Well, I want to thank Lou Thompson, the chair of the High-Speed Rail Peer Review Group, as well as California State Transportation Secretary Brian Kelly for joining us. If you'd like to stay current on Valley and state politics, you can sign up for our free e-newsletter, The Maddy Daily, by logging on to our website at maddyinstitute.org.
And now, another perspective.
Governor Jerry Brown is pressing ahead with plans to get the high-speed rail back on track, even as it remains mired in litigation and Central Valley Republicans oppose it. He points out that there was opposition to every major project ever done in California. The Golden Gate Bridge, the University of California system, the State Water Project, they all turned out okay. Lately, the governor and his administration have been emphasizing what they see as the environmental benefits of the rail project, particularly for the valley. California is projected to add 20 million people by 2050. High-speed rail promises lower emissions than expanded car and air travel. As we at the Bee's editorial board noted recently, the project is committed to zero emissions during construction. They intend to plant thousands of trees and replace diesel pumps with electric pumps. Of course, how much of that happens remains to be seen in a project that's noteworthy for promising too much. But this we know, something must be done about the air in the Central Valley. Many of us have had family members who experience the impact of asthma and other ailments associated with air pollution. The American Lung Association ranks the Bakersfield-Delano areas as the worst in the nation for year-round particle pollution and short-term particle pollution, followed by Merced, Fresno, Hanford, Corcoran, and Modesto. How would we better spend the rail money? More freeways? How many Californians would support that? Widen freeways? Perhaps, but that's costly. More airport runways? Where would they go? San Diego is talking about expanding its airport in Mexico. Not lost on any of the supporters of the rail project is the reality that the Central Valley is where the greatest unemployment is. The governor is convinced that one way to help the valley out of its doldrums is to connect it to the rest of the state. Against this backdrop, the governor has proposed spending $250 million in revenue generated by the pollution credits bought and sold in the cap and trade program for high-speed rail. His main contention is that we must reduce air contaminants. That will require new approaches to how we move people and freight and power our state. And as we will be hearing increasingly, high-speed rail should be part of that solution. For the Maddy Report, I'm Dan Moraine.
The views expressed in the Maddy Report are those of the individuals participating in the program and do not necessarily reflect those of the Maddy Institute, the California Channel, Casey, or Valley PBS. If you'd like to share your thoughts about the points and opinions shared in the Maddy Report, visit our website at valleypbs.org/Maddy.
This is Mark Kepler for the Maddy Report. Thanks for joining us.